This is my bathroom update number 2, where I'm going to talk about the flooring, and I'm going to have a little tutorial later on in the video about how to do grouting. And so as part of this, I'm going to take you through a little bit what I did. First of all, you can see here I have the bare subfloor and I have some sections taped off. I also finished the drywall too. This is done because I was going to pour a flooring leveling compound in there. So I taped off the vent and everything. I filled in all the cracks between the plywood with some kind of flooring filler. And then after that, I applied a primer, which was really just like a roll-on thing to seal the wood from the moisture of the self-leveling primer from getting in. So after I poured that, I was going to do the tiling. And here's a few of my tools that I have. I have some various size notch trowels, floats. I also have grout additives and thin sets. So this is a look at all my tools. That wooden tool there I use for my concrete stuff, my mud pan work, and everything else is just for the tiling. Also, with this job, I was doing some 24-inch tile, or I will be doing some 24-inch tile. So I bought a 26-inch tile cutter. And of course, I also have to have my drill with my paddle mixer for the grouts. And then for wet cuts, I have this cheap, Black & Decker wet saw with a 7-inch blade. For this tiling job, I used a tile leveling system made by QEP. You see there, you've got a wedge, and then you've got this spacer type of situation. The way this works is the spacer has a flange on both sides, and when you put the tile on, this is what it looks like when I tiled. You put the tile on top of that flange, or you put that under the wet thin set, and then you put the next tile on top of that. So each tile is on top of that white flange, and then when you push in that wedge, it clicks in. It's got a serrated edge, it clicks it in, and what should happen is when you push in the new tile and click it in, it'll push down the new tile to the same exact height of the old tile. That way, when you put them all around, you'll have a nice level floor. Now here's a video of me grouting. So after I got the tile done, I waited 24 hours. I saved a section to show you how I do grouting. So you can see there's a section that I haven't grouted yet. And I usually grout in sections. So this technique that I'm doing, first I wet down the floor with a sponge. And again, I only do a small section at a time. So start by wetting the floor down. That just makes the grout go in a little bit easier. And then I just take the grout that I mixed in the bucket. Now what I'm using is a gray sanded grout with an add mix. I used either Grout Boost or Grout Shield or whatever it's called. So I just throw a couple piles on the floor and then take my rubber float and I just start working the grout into the cracks, into the spaces. I use the broad side of the float to move around the pile, and then I use the narrower side to really, push it into the cracks. And that's all there is to it. Just kind of work it into the cracks. I mix that stuff, the grout, with a consistency that's like, like frosting or something like that. It's got to be wet enough to where it'll flow inside those cracks, but not too wet. So I just keep working it in, and again, I only do a small section at a time, like a section about that big, and just keep working it into the cracks. And in some cases, I'll push it in pretty hard where it needs to be pushed in. And then once I'm done pushing in the cracks, I'll take the float at a 45-degree angle, and then I'll pull it at a 45-degree angle and 45 degrees, and with the tile. The reason I do that is that you're supposed to do that, is to not pull it with the, where the grout lines are. You don't want to pull any of the grout out of the tile that you've already applied. So you do it at a 45-degree angle, and that keeps the grout into the cracks, but gets it off the tile. And then I collect any excess, put it back in the bucket so it keeps wet. Now once I've collected all the excess grout off the floor, I'll then get my sponge and wring it out. And then this is the technique that I like to use, and I've seen other videos of tilers that do that. First thing I do is really lightly, I just kind of work the grout lines. So I'm just barely any pressure, and I'm just working those grout lines. And the reason I do that is because sometimes that grout float will either put too much in, or it'll kind of put lines in the grout. So when you work them just a little bit with the sponge, you'll make them nice and smooth and even. And this doesn't take very long. That's about it. And so once I've worked those grout lines really lightly with this, not very damp sponge, I'll clean it out, wring it out again. And I'm always wringing it out. I never want to do a real wet sponge on this. So what I do is I take one side, the clean side of the sponge, and wipe one time. And then I flip the sponge over to the other clean side, wipe it one more time. And I just keep repeating. So the next row of tiles, the clean side, wipe it once, flip it over, next clean side, wipe it one more time. And again, I always do a small section of tile at a time. I'll do, maybe a 4x4 area in this way, and then move on to the next area once I've done that. Now, because that's usually all I do, you can see here I'll do a little bit of wipe up in the middle of the tile, trying to avoid the grout lines. The only reason I do that here, it shouldn't be necessary, but this is a textured wood looking tile, and it's kind of has some grooves and texture to it, so I did a little more to pull that grout off. Now once that grout has set for about an hour, I use cheesecloth. Now cheesecloth is here's a picture of it. It's something you buy in the hardware store, the home improvement store, in the paint or stain aisle. And basically what it is it's like medical gauze in these 6x 25 feet sheets. So I take about a 4-foot or 3-foot piece of it, wad it up, and I basically use it to buff out the tile. Now again, this is 1 hour, letting the grout set for 1 hour after I'm done grouting. So the grout at this point is hardened, but I'm really not touching the grout. I'm really just focusing on buffing out all the haze, the grout haze that's left on the tile. You can see that haze is really making the tile very gray, and almost none of the color of the tile is coming through. But again, you wait an hour once you're done with that, what I just showed you, the grouting, and then just don't try to wipe up with the sponge too much. This is the step that you use. And then once you buff that out, then I wring out the sponge really dry. Again, more just a new set of clean water. Wring the sponge out really good so it's not wet. And then once you wipe that haze off, look at that, it's perfect. The color of the tile is all back. And once you've done this through the whole floor, you are done. This is the work after I've did all the buffing and cleaning off the haze. And this is a completely finished tile floor. Now that gray is actually a lot lighter once it dries, but you only have to wait about 24 hours after it dries. So at this point, my flooring is done, and I have, as you can see, the drywall as well is also done.